Welcome all to the HOJ-Cast episode 33. It's been about a month-long break since the prior episode. A lot has happened. A cross-country trip has happened. The West Coast Card Show has happened. An illness happened, although I'm on the mend now. And, of course, two really, really big auctions happened with Heritage. Two auctions that sort of provide a milestone along this journey that we've all been on. One of the subplots of the House of George, or I'm sorry, not the House of George, the HOJ-Cast. Wow, I just had a little slip there going back to the House of Jordan's podcast days. One of the subplots of the HOJ-Cast. I guess the HOJ-Cast is sort of a subplot of the House of Jordans, but one of the, or a spinoff almost, like when one of the characters on a TV show goes off and has their own spinoff, and they never usually go well, do they? I guess with Frasier being the one exception. Anyway, one of the subplots of the HOJ-Cast is discovering, uncovering, learning, classifying, thinking about Michael Jordan, one of ones. And we've only scratched the surface of that topic in many ways. We've done some deep dives into his very first one of ones, his first 72 one of ones, the one of ones of his that belong exclusively to the 90s. But there's a ton more to uncover, and it's going to take years to do it. Honestly, let's not kid ourselves. It's going to take a long time. We're still just beginning to unpack all the meaning and excitement that accompanies diving deep into his 90s one of ones, his very first one of ones. So, but I say subplot because there's lots of other threads and arcs to the HOJ-Cast as well. Last summer, we were diving deep into Patrick Mahomes' rookie year memorabilia autograph one of ones, and just memorabilia autograph cards in general. And then we've woven in some Jokic stuff, some McCaffrey stuff, some Purdy stuff. And I haven't even really gotten a chance to touch very much on Luka stuff. And those are just a few of the angles, right? There's so many more angles. There's episodes about debriefing the card show experience at the National. There's just how to navigate a bull market, and just so many different topics and angles and things to cover. And there just really aren't enough hours in the podcasting schedule to even get close to touching them all. But anyway, this is one of the subplots of this podcasting experience, is collecting Michael Jordan one of ones. And it's a new adventure for me personally. I've only been focusing on them since about June of 2025. So, but we're quickly approaching a year, which has been really exciting. A lot of progress has been made, and we've gotten to discuss maybe 4 or 5 MJ one of ones here that I've acquired so far. But there's dozens more that I can't wait to talk about. Just have to find the time and the angle to do it. So, so the storytelling part of it is one of the most fun parts about it. That's one of the things that really fires me up. It gets me excited to turn on this microphone and do podcast episodes. But we certainly had a milestone. We certainly had a milestone in the arc of Michael Jordan 1-1 collecting, and it was fortuitous timing that 2 of the first 72 Michael Jordan 1-of-1s came to auction. And I'm pretty sure that this is the first time that any of the 72 Michael Jordan 1-of-1s has come to auction since we've taken a serious interest in documenting this. I'm trying to rack my brain. I believe the most recent sale other than these would have been the purchase of the Quantum Gold 23 that happened, I think, last July. So that was within the boundary of my first purchase of a Michael Jordan 1-of-1. But it was before these dives had gotten as deep as they've gotten. That was still when things were a bit nascent, and I mean they still are nascent in many ways, but they've come a long way too. So I guess you've got the Quantum Gold 23, which is one of the 72 that sold last July, and then you've got these two, and sort of these two are the first two. I'll venture to say, if memory serves, these are the first two to sell since. I feel like I've been able to wrap my arms around what it means for a card to be a 90s one of Michael Jordan. So these are really important sales, landmark sales in the history of telling the story of this subset of cards, and it's a subset that has never been identified before, at least not to my knowledge. And so that's going to actually color the discussion that's going to happen here as we talk about these cards and these sales. That's going to very much color this, because the perspective that we're bringing to bear here on these one of ones, to see them as a group of 72, to see them and to say, I'm going to categorize Michael Jordan's first one of ones as a group, and there are 72 of them. And just as a refresher, there are 7 from the first year of Michael Jordan's one of ones, so that's 1997-98, and then there are 65 from the second year, which is 1998-99. And then the third year of Michael Jordan one of ones, which was a prolific year, it ended up having around 230 or so. The most prolific year of Michael Jordan one of ones ever. In fact, after that year, they drop off precipitously to like 10, 15, 20 per year. But that 1999-2000, that prolific year of Michael Jordan one of ones, it just doesn't quite fit into the 90s boundary, because it's associated with the 1999-2000 NBA season. And as a methodological note, I do believe that there's good reason to classify every product as belonging to, or in association with, or being in association with a specific NBA season. And so from that point of view, and just from the point of view of generally how these things are classified and cataloged on checklist websites and so forth, Michael Jordan has just 2 seasons of one of ones that fall into the 90s, and they happen to be his first 2 seasons of one of ones. So that's just a really nice, clean bucket of the 72 one of ones, the 7 from the first year and the 65 from the second year. And there's lots of other ways to break those up too. Once you're looking only at Michael Jordan's first one of ones, his 90s one of ones, you can divide those groups, as we did in the previous episode, into the first 15 and the latter 57, I guess. Yeah, right, 15 and right, I guess it's a 72. Okay, so that's why the previous podcast episode was called the first 15, because it talked about the 15 Michael Jordan one of ones that very likely were released prior to his retirement announcement in January of 1999. So that's a different way of sort of thinking about them. I mean, there's going to be many novel ways of thinking about how to categorize the 72, or there's the way that I sort of did it when I teamed up with Frizzo Collects to make this to make the Michael Jordan index for the 72 one of ones, is I put them into 6 buckets. And we don't need to go over each of the 6 buckets here. You can go to 90smj1of1s.com and you can look at it and sort of read about those different buckets and how that worked and how that played out. But there's always going to be novel and exciting ways to look at these things, because this is uncharted territory. This is a brand new way of looking at things that's novel to the collecting experience, to the Michael Jordan collecting experience. So here we are. We've got these 2 sales, and what do we make of them? Well, first of all, let me get the elephants in the room out of the way. I was not the buyer of either, and I wasn't even, frankly, I wasn't even close to becoming the buyer of either. And that's going to be sort of the central theme of this episode, is discussing my thought process and why I didn't buy either of these, and what all the different levels of reasoning that went into that. And there's actually a lot to learn from these sales. There's a lot more to glean from them than just the surface level price. And so we're going to get into that today. And today we're not going to talk about, I'm not going to reveal any new pickups. I'm not going to reveal any new cards. I'm not going to, do sort of the traditional mold of the show. This show is just going to be very introspective. It's going to be a little more off the cuff, a little less researched in advance, a little less prepared, because all that preparation was sort of happening organically as I was considering whether or not to go ahead and try to win one of these, or one of these one of ones. And so ultimately, that's the point of this episode, right? Is that it's obviously a very exciting time, right? I mean, the 2 first sales of the 72 one of ones to take place ever since this real subplot of the HOJ-Cast has taken root. So that's an exciting thing. We've sort of, for those of us who've been listening along and following along, or maybe even participating and trying to find one of these one of ones for themselves, that this is sort of a culmination of a lot of different things. This is sort of some Michael Jordan one of ones entering the main stage, entering the hobby's main stage, and they did it with a splash. For those who don't know, the 97 Ultra Masterpiece one of one, or as I call it, the Platinum Masterpiece, sold for $2.1 million with Heritage. That was last weekend. And the 98 Ultra Masterpiece. So this is from so that one, the 97 Platinum Masterpiece. That's from the first year of one of ones. It's one of the 7. And then the 98 Ultra, the Purple Masterpiece one of one. That's from the 65, the second year, and it's also a post-retirement announcement MJ as well. And that one sold for $625,000. So $2.1 million for the 97 Ultra Platinum Masterpiece one of one, and then $625,000 for the 98 Ultra Purple Masterpiece one of one. And so what I want to do here, I want to be careful to do this. I'm going to tell you that I'm trying to do this because it takes discipline and thoughtfulness to do this right, and I'm not sure I'm going to, but I'm going to announce what I'm trying to. What I want to try to do is to talk about these cards with the appropriate reverence and to congratulate the winner of each. These are monumental. These are landmarks in the history of Michael Jordan collecting. They're very new, so it sort of feels new rather than historical, but these are landmark sales. I was watching Across the Hobby with Adam, and he pointed out that the 98, the Purple Masterpiece one of them, that's the highest sale of any 1998 season sports card. At first he was like, is this the highest Michael Jordan? And he said, yes, it is. And then he said, is this the highest of 1998 period? And he started looking that up, and then some Pokemon sales filter. He's like, let's get rid of the Pokemon among sports cards. I'm pretty sure that's what he found, was that this is the highest sports card sale from the 1998 season, which is pretty neat. Okay, so these are historic sales in their own right, both of them, and so it's very exciting. And there are new owners of these who should be very excited to own them. And so I have to try to find a way to explain my thought process, which ultimately ended up in me not placing a single bid on either one, and find a way for me to explain why I behave that way and sort of all the observations that I've gleaned from this without in any way insulting or denigrating these two cards. So how do I do that? How do I say I didn't want it, but it's great that somebody else did? Okay. And it's not the fact, and so that's sort of the needle that needs to get threaded. It's not that I didn't want them. Of course I wanted them. It's that I didn't want them at that price. And price is always going to be a function of the collector who's making the internal decision, right? So that price might not make sense for me, but it could certainly make sense for somebody else. And that's probably something that we'll get to at some point as well. But so I just want to kind of say I'm going to try to not knock these down as I explain why I didn't go for them. And as a sort of related to that, though, I was prepared to go for them if they were going to go in the price range that I was willing to buy them at. And I was really willing to stretch the price range. That'll become more clear as we go on here. But these sold for extraordinary prices. And I was willing to pay what I thought was possibly an extraordinary price and have to trade in significant parts of my collection to do it. And there are some parts of my collection I feel are over matured. I don't know what the word is. They've matured too far. They are worth more in the market than they are to me. So like there were some cards that I was certainly ready to let go to do it, but the price just got too high. It got quite a bit too high for where I wanted to be at, and this episode is going to explain quite a bit about that. It's going to explain quite a bit about that. And really, the one that I had my eye on was the Platinum Masterpiece one of one. That being one of the 7 first years. and that being the one that all evidence points to as being chronologically the first Michael Jordan 1 of 1 to ever be released. It comes from the first season, which has 7, but among those 7, it appears that this one was the first one to hit shelves chronologically. And that is confirmed by the marketing materials and stuff at the time, contemporaneous documents, and like Beckett magazine, and I think that there are some sell sheets floating around and things like that. And also by the fact that the copyright date on the backside of the card is 1997. And it's the only Michael Jordan 1 of 1 to have a copyright date on its backside that's prior to 1998. Now, I came home from the West Coast trip with a pile of Beckett magazines waiting for me. So I know the plan that I ultimately want to do is to sort of figure out when each of these Michael Jordan 1 of 1s came out. There's only 72 of them. So and in fact, quite a few of them come from the same product. So and the products got released together, right? Or a product is if you have if you have 30 quantum goals, for example, and those all came from the same product, then finding out the release date of that one product takes care of the release date for 30 cards, right? So that's a research project on the agenda. Another research project on the agenda that I hopefully we'll have time to get to at some point is I just want to make a live list of all the historical public sales of Michael Jordan's 1 of 1s, and sort of one of the reasons why I want and these things will live on the 90s MJ1of1s.com website. And one of the reasons why I want to make that list is, first of all, it's very low maintenance. I mean, last episode I think we looked at how often these sell, and it was just like 1 or 2 a year for the most part. So it's a very low maintenance task or chore, but also because it's very, very difficult to actually search these out. Very difficult to query a sales history and find them. And part of the reason why is because so many sellers on eBay want to call their card a 1 of 1, and it's not a 1 of 1. At least it's not stamped 1 of 1, which is my requirement for the definition of a 1 of 1. For me to consider a card 1 of 1, it must be stamped as such. And if it's not, then you sort of get into this gray area where sort of almost anything can become a 1 of 1. Like a card serial numbered 7 of 10 is sort of a different card than one serial numbered 8 of 10. Are those both 1 of 1s? Or if a card has a population of 1 and is particular grade, that's sort of a 1 of 1. It's a 1 of 1 in its condition, and so on and so forth. Or if there were, a card has a print run of 50, but we know for a fact that 49 of them got destroyed, is the one remaining out of 50, is that a 1 of 1? So you instantly sort of get all of these things become very cloudy quickly if we don't have a hard and fast rule for what a 1 of 1 is. And that hard and fast rule is a very simple one and a straightforward one, a common sense one, which is it must be stamped as a 1 of 1 or otherwise indicated as a 1 of 1 by the manufacturer. So cards, to be considered a 1 of 1 in my book, it must bear the insignia of being a 1 of 1. With that said, I don't begrudge anybody who might say, I have the Pop 1 PSA 10 of something and it's a 1 of 1 because it's the only one in this condition. And I don't begrudge anybody that. It is accurate to describe that as a 1 of 1. It is the only one of the category of cards in that condition. It is a 1 out of 1 in the total category. So that's fine to describe that way. I just have my methodology. I have my way of looking at it, which is it must bear the 1 of 1 insignia, and it must have been put there by the manufacturer. It can't have been put there by me writing 1 of 1 on it later. Right? It must have been made that way by the manufacturer. The manufacturer must have only made 1 and stamped it as such. And even that gets a little bit cloudy when we talk about the purple masterpiece, right? Which we covered. There are actually 2 issues of this card. Both bear the 1 of 1 insignia. Both are graded by PSA as authentic to the manufacturer. And it just seems that there are 2, and the legend goes that one of them was pack issued and the other one was never intended for public consumption. Maybe it was produced to be a replacement copy, or maybe it was a test copy, or who knows. But we do know that there are 2, and the Pop Report says that there are 2. And if you look at the 90s, if you look at the owners of the 90s MJ 1 of 1s, if you look at that page on 90s MJ1of1s.com, you can see the link to the 2 different certs, and you can And you can look at them yourself and see that there are in fact two. So let's get to the point here. Let's get this show on the road, right? So the point here is to walk you through my thought process, right? This could be a really interesting exercise. There's going to be a lot of price talk. This episode is going to be much lighter on theory. This episode is going to be much lighter on history, on classification, on sort of understanding the stories of all these one-of-ones, and sort of unpacking what each of the one-of-ones are and classifying them and finding how they relate to each other and comparing them to each other. There's going to be less theorizing about what rarity means and how do you compare one-of-ones when one-of-one is already the height of rarity. But even then, there are other ways. There's chronological rarity and lineage rarity and other things we've talked about on other episodes. So it's not going to really be about that. We've developed that. We've spent months and months developing these frameworks, thinking about them, working through them. Now this episode is going to be a lot heavier on price talk, market talk. And that's not for everybody. It's really not my cup of tea either. I think price has way too large of a role in hobby discussions right now. Price is the output. It's not the input. That's sort of the point that I would make to somebody if they said, "What do you mean we're talking too much about price?" Price is the output. Price should reflect a well-reasoned hobbyist's conclusion after carefully thinking through the full offering of cards and carefully thinking through the opportunity cost and carefully comparing what the available options are. And so price should be the byproduct of that. Price should be obvious. Price should reflect things that we already knew. But instead, a lot of discussion around price and price in general is sort of treated as the input. It's sort of like, whatever price gets printed, that sort of tells us which cards matter. That tells us which cards are better than other cards. This is why sort of I hesitate to use the word better in some contexts, because there is no decisive way to say which card is better. You can say one card sold for more. You could say one card got more likes when you post it to your social media page, or you could say that one card is rarer than another card, or there's many different angles. But to say better implies that there's some objective metric that we are all using, and we're all grading cards in the same rubric, and so therefore, it's obvious this one's better than the other one if we all just sort of work our way through it. But that's not the way it works. In fact, I think price is actually quite far afield from ultimately where a careful diagnosis of the full offering of cards would ultimately lead you if you actually went through that full thought experiment. So I'm kind of averse and adverse to talking about price as a major topic, but it is a big topic. It is where the rubber meets the road. Price is very important. Here's the power of price in a nutshell. Even though I think that a much more fruitful approach to collecting is to get to price last, and to do all the other work first. Not to let price sort of try to tell us what matters and what doesn't matter, because price is just, a lot of times it's just two people deciding what something's worth. Whether it's two bidders, we're going to let two bidders on an auction. Maybe what if both of them were intoxicated and they just sort of both got carried away? Now that's going to tell us how we should think about the market, how we should value our own cards, how we should rank and think about cards. Or it's a price is established by a buyer and a seller coming to and mutually agreeing on a price. So once again, that's just two people. If it's like a private transaction or a negotiation on a fixed price item, it's just two people who come to an agreement on that price. And even then, that assumes good faith. There also are prices that are being set not in good faith. There are prices being set just for the purpose of printing a price, so that it can have this trickle down effect. So, but with all those caveats in place about price is also very important, because price, because the power of the comp is such that it is. Because comps essentially are taken very seriously to sort of establish, like, well, if the last one sold for it, then the next one should sell for it. And it doesn't always work that way, obviously. And there's good theory to sort of support that. In the auction setting, the idea is that there was somebody else who was willing to pay almost as much as the winning bidder did. So if another copy of this came to market, that the runner-up, the loser, should be willing to honor that same price that they bid for on the first item. So these are sort of some of the reasons, the philosophical underpinnings for why comps are useful to inform future decision making. But be that as it may, with the nature of the price discussion, kind of all comes back to this too, which is that, price lets you do this. If A has a card that's worth $2,000 and B has a card that's worth $1,000, and let's suppose these are liquid, highly transacted cards that are available at any given time. A can sell his card for $2,000. He can buy a copy of B's, which costs $1,000, and he'll still have $1,000 left over to do something else with, to buy another card with, or multiple cards, or what have you. This is the power of price. The power of price is the power to enact outcomes in your collecting experience. And so the price, the value of the cards in your collection, as is often dictated by comps, especially when you have cards that are highly liquid and transact a lot, it really is the power to shift and reshape and construct your collection, right? Price is powerful. Even as much as I sort of preach the deconstruction of price, even as much as I sort of think that the price has actually gone very far afield from what the actual facts of the cards tell us. If anybody's slowed down to actually do the research and survey everything that exists, that nonetheless, that price is very, very powerful. Price is such a great tool that a collector can use to reshape their collection. So that's the obligatory side note on price. But anyway, that's where we're headed here. All right, that's where we're headed. This episode is going to discuss price, and it's going to discuss how I had to make decisions and operate under constraints, factoring in price. All right. So let's get to it then. So here's sort of where this discussion starts. As I just alluded to, I put theory before price. I think price should reflect theory, not the other way around. So I start with this observation. The very first one of ones, as far as I can tell, are the holiest grails in this sports card hobby. And it just so happens that overlapped with Michael Jordan. But even if it didn't, right? Even if Michael Jordan wasn't, in the midst of his last dance season as the first basketball one of ones were coming to the market, even if that wasn't true, the first one of ones is a type of card. Still inescapably to me would be the holiest of grails. And sort of the reasoning behind that is that the one of one is the rarest type of a card that could exist. There's just one copy. It's a masterpiece. There's just one of them. And you're told specifically that the manufacturer made just one, and they put that one of one stamp on there as a sort of warranty and often a representation of its one of one status. So that's a very, very special type of card. It's the rarest possible type of card. But there's lots of nuances in that, because if I have a one of one from 2013 Prism, and then I have another one of one from 2004 Topps Chrome, are those equally rare? And there's certainly somebody could say yes, they're both the only copy of something, so yes, they're equally rare. But somebody else could say, well, there's other ways to look at it. How many more seasons did Prism make that exact same one of one? for in Prism's case, it's just the pure black one of one. Actually, they had two different one of ones in that first season of basketball one of ones. They had the black mosaic one of one, and then they had the pure black one of one. You can sort of say, well, how many seasons after that did they continue to include that pure black one of one? And I don't know. I think it's maybe 11 or 12. Then you say, okay, so, and then 2004 had the first Topps Chrome Superfractor one of one. And how many more seasons did they make that? And you say, well, I think that went through 09-10. So I don't know, I guess that's 7 seasons. And so you sort of have 7 seasons of the Superfractor one of one. You have, let's just call it 12 or 13 of the Prism Pure Black one of one. You say, well, there's fewer Superfractor one of ones. So that's something, but the pure black has a longer lineage, and it's actually it's less common for something to have 12 or 13 uninterrupted seasons of the same one of one type of card than it is for one to have 7. There's many more one of ones that have had a 7-year run. There's far fewer that have had a 12 or a 13-year run. So sort of you can say, well, maybe that tilts the scale. Maybe you feel that tilts the scale towards the Superfractor because there's fewer total Superfractors. Maybe you feel like it tilts the scale towards the pure black Prism one of one because it's so much more elusive to have a card that belongs to an uninterrupted lineage of something, or even if the lineage is interrupted at some point, to have that many different seasons issue that card, that in itself is a type of rarity. And then you have chronological rarity. And I don't want to do the chronological rarity bit again. I've done it on probably a half dozen podcast episodes by now. But the chronological rarity argument suggests that something that comes earlier is rarer than something that comes later, right? So that tilts it towards the Superfractor. So once we have leveled the playing field to only talking about one of ones, there still are ways to examine and compare those one of ones. And those are 2 of the ways, but there's other ways too. You might know of ways that I've never even thought of or talked about before. You might create a way as you're listening to this right now. Something might be occurring to you. And so that's what makes the first one of ones so fascinating, is that they grade out so high on the chronological rarity. Now, a lot of them don't necessarily have the lineage rarity because it was a period of experimentation, right? So that's sort of, maybe you could make an argument back that really the holiest grails in the hobby are the one of ones that got the longest lineage, and you sort of want to ground an argument in that. But I personally am quite moved by the idea that the earliest appearances of the rarest card type, and the card type that I've oriented my entire collecting philosophy around, the masterpiece, the one of one, that to me, just to me, doesn't need to be true for you, but just for me, the holiest grails are the first one of ones, and those just so happen to overlap with Michael Jordan's NBA licensed era, and he just so happens to actually be the player with the most one of ones from that first season. He has 7. I don't believe anybody else has more than 6, and that's because of the power deck. The power deck is a one of one that only Michael Jordan got. No other player got it. So an interesting wrinkle there in the Michael Jordan lane of the very first one of ones. But so that's sort of the starting premise here. That's my starting premise as a collector. I'm not insisting that you go along with that or agree with it. I'm just explaining that from where I'm sitting, the most desirable cards I can think of are the first one of ones, and then there's just the magnificent happenstance that Michael Jordan overlaps with that. And it's probably not just total happenstance. Is probably part of the reason for that is because Michael Jordan was a driving force in the popularity of cards in the 90s, and the popularity of cards brought multiple manufacturers in, and there were multiple licenses at that time, and the competition among them spurred the innovation that yielded the one of one. So it's not total happenstance that Michael Jordan was part of that, but nonetheless, Michael Jordan is there, and he is part of these holiest grails, as I'll call them. So we have that, right? And so sort of as soon as I had that light bulb moment, I started feverishly trying to figure out, in other words, I need to know what all the Michael Jordan one of ones are. I need to know what all of them are. I've done that, at least through his NBA licensed tenure. I could tell you every Michael Jordan 1 of 1 made through 2009-10. Got a nice little spreadsheet that does that. And there's less than 600, which is a small number itself. But I could also, it's sort of as part of my, it's sort of as once I, sort of had my arms around the fact that there's really not many of these, and this is very exciting, and there's nobody talking about this. No, I don't know if anybody's ever thought about this in this way before. Maybe they have, but it was novel to me. Then I said, well, where do I start? And of course, on the one hand, I was just like, I just want any Michael Jordan 1 of 1 here possible, especially ones that are flying under the radar, ones that are off of the ones that don't have big market premiums. I want to gobble up any and all of those. I don't even care which tenure they come from. But besides that, I had to sort of pick an area of focus. So I had to zoom in on something, and I said, well, it just makes the most sense to zoom in on the first. Makes the most sense to start at the beginning. Where else would you start but at the beginning? And so that's how 90s MJ 1 of 1s was born. The websites and the index and all of the research and commissioning Frizzo to not only make this beautiful index, but to construct all of these beautiful images that depict each of these cards, because as we've gone over, around 14 of these of the 72 have never even surfaced, but here we have a beautiful image that represents each of them in what's most likely a very realistic depiction. So that's sort of the baseline here. Like that must be understood for everything else that I say after this to be understood. It's important to understand my approach as a collector, that I view the first 1 of 1s as extremely special cards. And then Michael Jordan is, he's a very important athlete to my collecting trajectory, my favorite athlete of all time, so on. The athlete with the most total MVPs in any sport, tied with Wayne Gretzky. But and certainly the athlete with the most total MVPs in the NBA's history, and the next runner-ups are LeBron and Kareem with 8 apiece, and then football you have Brady with 8. So this is just the convergence of a lot of my worlds, many years of thinking and studying the history of sports and also sports cards, and it all sort of converging on Michael Jordan's first 1 of 1s. And then a feverish research project and a feverish collecting project to just try and get as many of these as I possibly can. That created such a clear and obvious goal for me that I should really that I would enjoy quite a bit, directing my collecting resources, thought, time, and effort towards gobbling up Michael Jordan's first 1 of 1s. And that's all I've been doing for the most part for the last, I guess, 9 months it is now. And it's been a renaissance in my collecting journey. It's breathed what will prove to be years and years and years of life and inspiration into collecting for me. So it's been a very special ride. It's been a very special subplot in the HOJ-Cast. So let's get to the next part here. All right. So let's get down to the nitty gritty. How did these get to these prices? And why didn't I like them at these prices? And so I know where I want to get this conversation to, but I need to figure out which direction I want to use to get it there. And so I think I'm going to start like this. Among the 72 1 of 1s of Michael Jordan, let's use a quantum gold as sort of an example. The market price for that is maybe around $20,000 right now. Maybe more, in all fairness, it could be a lot more. Okay. I'm very curious to see what's going to happen the next time a quantum gold 1 of 1 comes to market, or the next time any of the first 72 Michael Jordan 1 of 1s comes to market. I'm very curious to see what's going to happen. But I don't think that these two ultra sales are actually reflective of the market for the other 1 of 1s. It'd be very exciting. It'd be amazing. In fact, it'd be a hobby confirmation that other collectors are seeing things the same way that I am, which always feels great, right? To be part of a group rather than to be a lone wolf on an island somewhere. But although I don't know, I kind of like the lone wolf thing too. But it feels great to be validated in some sense, especially if you sort of have a claim to be having been a little bit early or whatever. But I don't think that's what this is. Okay, that's sort of where this discussion is ultimately going to end up going. Is I don't think that the price of these two has bearing on the price of the other 72 Michael Jordan or the other 70 Michael Jordan 1-of-1s. We're going to get to that. We're going to explain why that is. But well, yeah, I mean that's sort of that's kind of like a so the reason why I bring up the quantum gold is this. All right, the market price for one of those, the last sale was somewhere around 15,000, 16,000. Granted, that was last summer. Granted, we don't know what the next one would sell for, right? That's sort of the point here is that that I'm asking you to stipulate that the value of a quantum gold might be 20,000 right now, but it might be a lot more, and that sort of you'll see why if it is a lot more, then my argument starts to weaken a little bit. But if we do assume that it's 20,000 for a quantum gold 1-of-1 today, if one showed up, then it's worth 1% of the platinum masterpiece. 1%. 2 million versus 20,000. Okay. So that's very important to framing this right now. In no way am I going to try to put these two cards on an equal playing field. That's not the point of this. But the point of this is to say that if you've adopted the point of view that these 72 Michael Jordan 1-of-1s are very special, then 100x multiplier is not feasible to me as a collector. The trade-off is too high. In other words, if I would have to trade 100 Michael Jordan 1-of-1s to get this one platinum masterpiece Michael Jordan 1-of-1, I wouldn't do it. All right, now there aren't 100 Michael Jordan 1-of-1s that to do that with, right? At least not from the first 72. There's only 72, and once you take this card out, there's only 71 others. So it doesn't even make sense to sort of posit that. But I just illustrate it as a hypothetical to make that point that that trade-off doesn't make sense. Now, here, let me sort of explain why. So think about the Michael Jordan PMG Red, right? Very important card from the first ever PMG set, a color match to the Michael Jordan has a white jersey on, but it color matches to the Bulls red and the trim of the uniform, and it's such a very special and important card. And I do own one of those, by the way, as well, right? So that's sort of like on a previous episode, I was kind of picking on the PMG Red a little bit, and that's why I sort of use that as a bit of a contrast from time to time, because I own one too, right? So like, I'm not knocking down a card I don't own in order to say nice things about one that I do, but I'm sort of being critical of one that I do own. And really, there's nothing to be critical about the PMG Red. The PMG Red might be the most beautiful card I've ever seen. I find the PMG Red to be magnificent. And anyway, there are 90 of those. There are 90 PMG Reds. And within that group of 90, there's going to be stratification, meaning there's going to be tiers. There's going to be some that are more desirable than others. So, for example, there is a jersey numbered one, 23. And as a quirk, if you don't know this already about how the PMGs are numbered, there's 90 red and there's 10 green to each player. So Jordan has 10 green and 90 red from the first PMG set. Now, even though there's 10 green and there's 90 red, they're both numbered to 100. So if you have a green, if you have like the green were the first 10 for Jordan. So I think for all players too, although maybe not. For some reason, I remember seeing like a Charles Barkley green that had a weird number. But for Jordan, I'm certain the first 10 are green. So like, let's say you have number 8, PMG green number 8, but it will say 8 of 100. Right, so you have to know that the first 10 are green and the last 90 are red in order to make sense of the serial number. But so there is a red 23 and it's 23 100, and then there's a red 45 of 100, which is also, a jersey number card, not matching the jersey number that Jordan was wearing, but briefly he did wear that 45. So those are special. Those are going to command some sort of multiplier. The jersey numbered will. And the jersey number is also is maybe the closest thing you get to a 1 of 1 among all of the reds. And then you've got different condition, right? You have some reds that are chipping quite a bit on the edges. All of them presumably have some level of chipping, but some more than others. You have some where the foil is chipping on the surface. You have some that are going to have more rounded corners. You might have some that are, more nicely centered, although centering is sort of tough to judge just sort of at a casual glance because the whole card is red. But I'm sure it matters to some people out there. And then so you're going to have this condition distinction. You might have some that are, PSA or BGS 8s, 9s even. And then you're going to have some that are, 4s, 5s, 6s. And then you're going to have some that are altered. Maybe somebody colored in a little something or took a little bit off of an edge or whatever. And so, and then you have altered, right? So you're going to have this stratification within the reds. And so I don't know. I think there's an altered copy on Golden right now that's approaching 200,000 as a price realized, and it hasn't sold yet. But let's just say that ends up going for 200,000, and then let's say that the jersey numbered copy is worth 2 million. That seems really, really strong, but let's say it is. Or let's say that, or let's say, I think there's a PSA 5 that's going to sell shortly, and it's already at around $500,000 or $600,000. So let's sort of say that you have a range. You have a range of multiples that at its very max peaks at 10x, right? So like, let's say, the lowest end is sort of the authentic altered one with no eye appeal, just the lowest version. That's 200,000. And then you have the jersey numbered one, which is the closest you'll get to a 1 of 1 among a PMG red. Let's say that's 2 million. Now, don't hold me to those prices, okay? I'm coming up with things off the cuff that I hope are broadly reasonable, but these are in no way official estimates. I'm just sort of reaching for some numbers using some quick back of the envelope math to make a point. And the point is that that 10x multiplier within all of the PMG reds. And if we really just focus in only on condition, maybe the multiplier is only like 5x at its peak, right? Like maybe the best condition PMG red is $1 million. The authentic altered is 200,000, and 5x. That's the ultimate spread based only on condition. 10x if you bring in the special factor of the jersey number, the 23. Okay, so 10x, right? So that's a multiplier, 10x, and so within this group of 90 cards, you have these 90 PMG reds out there, right? Like sort of imagine in front of you a table that has the 90 PMG reds. Here they all are. There are the 90, and they're all spread out, and you can look at them and you can say, oh, here's the 23, and here's one in great condition, all in front of you. All right, now taking that structure of thought, wipe away the 90 PMG reds on the table in front of you. You get a little bit smaller of a table in front of you, and now you have the 72 first 1 of 1s. Okay, so now you have those 72. So now within this group of 72, if some of them were 2x the other, 3x the other for a variety of reasons, the first season of them is significant, or the fact if you're very strict on playing days and you feel like 97, 98 is the final season of Michael Jordan's playing days. We've gone over that topic at length too. There's lots of different ways to look at playing days. There's certainly points of view that consider 98, 99 to be playing days. If you consider his playing days to be 84, his debut, through 03, his final game, or at the end of the 02-03 season, or if you sort of consider that 98, 99 are the only cards that contemporaneously document his 97, 98 season. So sort of they must be playing days cards because they are the first cards to document his final season. And if they're not playing days and there are no cards that document his final season, that doesn't really make sense. How can you have a playing days career if one of the seasons of your playing days aren't documented? So there's lots of different ways to look at it. You can also look at it as maybe you really are impressed by the 15 that came before his retirement announcement. Maybe that's a way that you like to divide it up, and so you put more premium there. Maybe you think that some just look better than the others. Maybe there's a condition premium, remember we were looking at the sales search. There's a few quantum golds that got PSA 10s, or maybe there's one or something like that. I don't know exactly how many PSA 10s or Gem Mint copies exist of the first 72 Michael Jordan 1 of 1s, but it's not many. Or maybe you find that that a nice mint copy should carry premium over another one, or maybe you're just really partial to a certain brand, or maybe you find just that outside of condition, there's just the design of one, or the photograph used on one, or the specific jersey that he's wearing, or the shoes you can see, or whatever. There's lots of different ways to look at it. And so, maybe you have like the perfect Michael Jordan 1 of 1, right? Where it's from your favorite brand, you find it to be beautiful, you love the action shot. And so like we start stacking the multipliers. So like, it's not just, like you like the brand better, so you value it as twice as much as the other ones from other brands. And then it's from the first season, and you really value chronological rarity. Now we're going to go to 3x, and then it's also a great photograph. So now you're like 4x. I value this one at 4 times as much as the others. Or you find that this one is really singular. Like unlike the alphabet golds or the quantum golds, which are each 1 of 1s, but they sort of belong to a subset. That this one has no others like it, right? So let's say you value that. Now you might see it the other way. You might, I often hear arguments, especially from 90s collectors. They like to collect in a group. They like to own something in common with other people. And so to me, the quantum golds and the alphabet golds are a brilliant way to sort of have ultimate rarity of 1 of 1s and sort of have cards in common with people. But that's a different discussion for a different day. But maybe you really value the uniqueness, like the Heart and Soul, I think, was the one that I covered on the most previous episode, and that's the only Michael Jordan Heart and Soul. I mean, there's a Jordan and Pippen Heart and Soul, but it's the only Heart and Soul that has Jordan, right? So there's technically there's 1.5 Michael Jordan Heart and Souls, but this is the only one that's Jordan. And maybe you really like the singularity, the uniqueness of it being the only one. Like it doesn't belong to. There aren't other versions of Jordan that have a similar design and stuff. So maybe now we're at a 4x or a 5x multiplier, right? And so maybe you just keep stacking the features that you like as 6x, 7x. Maybe you even get to a 10x. Okay, maybe you even get to the 10x, which is like the spread between the authentic altered PMG red and the jersey numbered, hypothetically. So maybe you even get to 10x. Okay. That's huge. That's a huge spread. That means 10x multiplier basically means if you had 10 of the 72 first 1 of 1s, you would trade 10 of them to get the one that you really like. And maybe you would, but that is such a hard topic for me to wrap my mind around. So sort of like as an analogy or as a metaphor, and understand that no metaphor is perfect. Okay. And so there will be flaws with this metaphor. If it was a perfect metaphor, then it wouldn't be a metaphor; it would just be a description. So understand there will be flaws with this. You'll probably think of flaws that are in this, and just know that I know it's not perfect. Okay, I got it. But think about it as with the metaphor in mind of sort of the waterfront property, right? Like I just got back from the West Coast, so think about being waterfront in Laguna Beach. Right, one of my favorite beach towns. Now, and let's say, for the sake of this, let's say there's 72 waterfront properties in Laguna Beach. There's certainly more, I know, but just for the sake of this little experiment, say there's 72 waterfront properties. And so sort of granting that belonging to the group of Michael Jordan 1 of 1s is sort of similar to being one of the 72 properties that has waterfront access, that there's a certain exclusiveness, a rarity to that just can't be replicated. There's just these 72 waterfront properties and no more. And granted that among these 72 waterfront properties, some of them are going to have great improvements. So sort of like when you look at an assessment of a piece of property, they sort of break it into 2 parts. They have the value of the land, and then they have the value of what they call the improvements, which just means what did you put on the land? Is there a house on the land or whatever? And so the improvements, or the house, or the structure that's on the land, some structures can be much more preferable to you than others. Maybe you like the architecture style better. Maybe you like a giant house better. Maybe this one just has way more windows for optimal views, or whatever. The improvements on one piece of land could be significantly more valuable than the improvements on the other piece of land. But being one of those 72 waterfront pieces of land in Laguna Beach sets a minimum threshold, right? Like even if you just had the piece of land and there was no improvements, it was just the land, that's still going to come with a serious price tag. It's going to be worth millions even without a single structure on it. Just the raw land is worth millions. And so, sort of that's how I see belonging to the very exclusive group of Michael Jordan's 72 first one of ones, is that no matter what improvements there are, or in other words, no matter how many multipliers you might stack on top of a card that makes it that much better to you, you're still, even the worst of those 72 is still Waterfront in Laguna Beach. It's still one of Michael Jordan's first one of ones, right? It's still one of his first one of ones. So there's, to me, just the way, remember, I don't need you to agree with this. I don't expect you to agree with it. I'm just walking through my thought process. All right. To me, there is a minimum value to belonging to that group of 72. And so even if we sort of permit a range of multipliers that's 3, 4, 5x, even all the way up to 10x, okay, even 10x, which like the range of the PMG Reds can balloon to that. I think that's probably pretty reasonable. So if we say like within that group, we can get up to 10x, so like within the group of 72 first one of ones, we'll let that get up to 10x. But when we're talking about the platinum versus a quantum gold, we're not talking about a 10x anymore. Okay. And already a 10x is like gulp, like 10 Michael Jordan one of ones, 10 Laguna Waterfront properties for one other one because the improvements on it are that great. I think I'd rather have the 10 Waterfront properties, right? Like I don't know. There's a lot of nuance that goes in that, right? Like maybe there's a fantastic structure that Frank Lloyd Wright built on the other one, and that's why it's worth 10 times the others. But we start getting to multipliers like 10x. But that's not what we're talking about here. The multiplier from the quantum gold, if we grant that it's worth 20,000, the multiplier from the quantum gold to the platinum masterpiece is 100x. So in other words, you could have all 30 quantum golds and try to swap them in for this. And by the way, if you had all 30 quantum golds, that would be the most impressive collecting achievement I've ever seen. Little toot my own horn moments, foreshadowing a future episode that's coming. I completed recently the run of Christian McCaffrey's base set Prism Black Finites. I collected all 9 from 2017, the first year of NFL License Prism, through I guess 2025, the final year. I collected all 9 of those. That took a lot of luck, took a lot of overpaying, took a lot of persistence. I don't know if I could do it again. I don't know if it could be done again. I've seen somebody who has Myles Garrett, who has the 2018, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, and 24. So I guess they have 7. They have 7 in a row for Myles Garrett, which is amazing. But they don't have the 2017, which is the rookie, and they don't have the 2025 yet either. And so that's very, very impressive as well, right? Like Myles Garrett and McCaffrey came into the league at the same time. So like I can really appreciate that achievement. But that's 9. That's 9, okay? And these are like newer releases, and Black Finites have really come up in value a lot, especially for like lower tiers. A couple $1,000 Black Finites suddenly are, creeping up to be worth a bit more nowadays. So the fact that they are creeping up means they're coming to market, means people are like, oh, I like this when this was $1,000, but it's 10,000 now. I'll sell this. So that's a pressure. There's a pressure bringing those to market. Plus, they're all very recently pulled, and people know about them. There's a lot of awareness for them. So me or anybody tracking down, let's say like 9 Prism Black Finites, like all 9 of a base set of McCaffrey, it took an incredible amount of luck, honestly, and help from the community. But even then, that pales in comparison to how difficult it would be to assemble all 30 of the quantum golds, especially knowing that some of them have never even surfaced. That we did that exercise a few episodes ago where we looked at all the unsurfaced Michael Jordan 90s one of ones. I think 10 of them were quantum golds or something. There was some significant number of quantum golds that hadn't surfaced. Maybe it was like 7 or 8 or something, but it was a lot. Okay. So, there's a real comparison point there. If somebody were to assemble all 30 quantum golds, that would sort of be like somehow finding a way to get 30 properties right next to each other that are all waterfront and lagoon. I mean, you could get 30, but to get 30 right next to each other, that would be that'd be very difficult to accomplish. But to get all 30 quantum golds, it's an unthinkable thing. It would be the most impressive collecting accomplishment I've ever seen. And even still, if you had all 30, you're not even a third of the way to owning the platinum masterpiece. Okay, that's the significance of understanding the 100x multiplier. You're not even a third of the way there. So the multiplier thing is part and parcel of my reasoning and my discussion here. And so you might sort of be scrambling in your mind to sort of justify why this actually should be worth 100x, why that sort of multiplier should exist, why you would be willing to collect every quantum gold, trade all of them for this card, and then still have to raise another $1.5 million. You might be trying to argue for why that is, and that's great. That's good. There's arguments back, and sharpening the mental sword. Great. Good practice, good to do. And maybe I'm missing something, maybe I'm wrong here. But I'm going to explain to you how that 100x multiplier came to be, at least how I think it came to be. And I'm going to explain to you why I wasn't willing to pay it. Now, let me throw this bone to the quantum gold too, because I've sort of let the idea exist, or left open the possibility, left open the door, that a quantum gold might be worth more like 40,000 today. Or more. I don't know. I'm so curious. It will be a much more exciting and interesting day in this subplot land of the HOJ-Cast when the next quantum gold 1/1 sells. And it'll be exciting and interesting no matter what it sells for, whether it sells for 15,000 or 50,000. It'll be very exciting for a number of reasons. Because if it sells for 15,000, that means I will have won it, and I will have been able to add another waterfront property to my portfolio. But if it sells for 50,000, I still might have won it. So I don't know, but we'll save that. That hasn't happened yet. We just have to patiently wait. I think it's reasonable to expect that at least one of the 72 will come to market within the next 12 months or so, and then we'll get to see what happens. But these sales, these ultra sales, I don't think they're actually teaching us much, if anything, about the pricing of the Michael Jordan 1/1s. There's not really an opportunity here to reach out and say, well, the platinum sold for 2.1 and the purple sold for 625, and now this is sort of vindication that the market really values Michael Jordan's first 1/1s. I don't think that's what's going on here at all. But even if we do grant the quantum gold a valuation of 40,000 or 50,000, even if it's 50,000, you're still at a multiplier of more than 40x to get you up to the masterpiece. Now, like I said, I can understand multipliers of 2x, 3x, 4x. Really think about what 4x means. 4 times as much money. 4 of those for one of these. 10x even. Like I think 10x starts to get really excessive, but I have to grant that even too, drawing on my sort of, well, look at how much variance you get within the PMG reds, and there's 90 of those, there's 72 of these, so why can't you get at least 10x of variance within these? But 40x even, 40x if those quantum golds are worth 50 grand each, and there's a 40x multiplier. These are 40x, 50x, 100x multipliers. These are huge multipliers that I'm just not sure if that sort of multiplier exists within any other conceptual cluster of cards. Like the 90 PMG reds is a conceptual cluster. The 10 PMG greens, we can form a mental model that sees those 10 as belonging to their own group. Would there be a 10x multiplier within that group of 10? Or the 72 essential credentials, or what? How many? See, this is what happens to me, and then I immediately need to go look this up. Jordan credentials, 1997. Yeah, 72. I don't know. For some reason, I was thinking 73, but I think Kobe has 73, and that may have been tripping me up. But okay. So there are 72 credentials futures of Michael Jordan from 1997, and there's 9 credentials now. And so those 72 credentials future, those are their own group, right? And so how much variance would exist within there? Could there be up to a 10x variance within that group? Or, there's 500 high voltage 500s, right? Like how much variance could exist within that group? Or there's 100 playmakers theaters. How much variance could exist from the cheapest to the most valuable within that cluster, and so on. So that's sort of framing the magnitude of the multiplier, and sort of explaining how 100x is very dramatic. And so that 100x is actually, it should raise a red flag. It should say 100x doesn't make sense. If it was 10x, we can sort of say, okay, these things are related, right? Like things can be 10x in price and still belong to the same group. Or to put it more specifically, if the market is valuing one thing at 10x more than the other, that doesn't preclude us from seeing them as belonging to the same group. But 100x makes it difficult to sort of believe that the market is seeing these things as belonging to the same group. And so I think that's a red flag that should go up. And so that brings me back to the point of, well, then, if there's this cluster of Michael Jordan 1-of-1s, right? And so instead of taking the masterpiece as the baseline for what these should be worth, let's take what the other ones are worth as sort of the baseline. So it was well documented on an episode that I did last year that for a trade that Stan and I did, we roughly valued the Power Deck 1-of-1 as worth about half of a molten metal fusion titanium out of 40 in a grade of BGS 85. And so how much was that worth at the time? How much is that worth today? Maybe, I think we were both kind of inflating values on each of our sides. So, maybe 300 was the value of that on the high end, and maybe 200 on the low end. And so maybe the value of that Power Deck as conducted through that trade is somewhere between 100 and 150,000. Maybe that titanium is worth 200,000, maybe it's worth 300. So maybe we say there's a range, right, that the Power Deck, according to that trade, is worth somewhere between 100 and 150. Now, if you remember, I spent considerable time doing the rare air rankings, where I ranked all of Michael Jordan's serial numbered cards from the 90s according to their rarity, and using lineage as a factor to further break the tie among 1-of-1s, and also to give credit to things like PMGs, which may have come out before, like 1-of-1s from 98 or 99. But yeah, this project was ranking all of Michael Jordan's serial numbered 90s cards, or at least almost all of them, and sort of ranking them by rarity, and then bringing in multiple factors. Not just, obviously the print run is a huge factor here, how rare it is just straight up in that sense, but also bringing in other factors like chronological rarity. So like a card from 96 that is higher numbered can still be seen as more rare than a card from 99 that's lower numbered, because it's better to come earlier than later and stuff like. So there's lots of these things factored in. And anyway, the results of the rare air rankings had a tie. There was a two-way tie for first between the Platinum Masterpiece and the Power Deck, because both of them are the first in a lineage. Both of them are 1-of-1s. Both of them come from the first year. But if you want to break the tie and say the Masterpiece came before chronologically, even though they're both from the first year, the Ultra was released on the release calendar before Upper Deck was, or at least Upper Deck Series 2 was. Fine. Like that's you be my guest to do that. I didn't split that hair here. I was fine with certain things tying, but so you have them tied here. But let's say that let's like completely knock down the Power Deck, right? Let's just say like that they tied on this rare air ranking, but the Ultra is has a more beautiful design or something, or Ultra, I don't know. I mean, there's really not a good brand premium argument here. There very well may be like an aesthetic argument. There's certainly people who like the power deck is very polarized. And some people think it's really neat. It's sort of like an artifact of the era, that it's also a CD. It's a multimedia item in addition to being a 2.5 by 3.5 inch trading card. But there's other people who are like, is that even a card? Should that even count? So, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the platinum is comfortably superior to the power deck. Okay, but even still, acknowledging that on the rarity scale, they're close, and the power deck has the Bulls red theme, and it does have a nice shine to it. I've shown that on my Instagram stories a few times, and it has a nice action shot of Jordan that I've photo matched and stuff. But anyway, it's a nice card, but let's give the tie comfortably to the platinum. So if the power deck is 100 to 150,000, then what should that make the platinum if we're only looking at it in the context of Michael Jordan's 1 of 1s? Forget everything else that you know about these cards. Just pretend that the whole universe of cards that we care about are just Michael Jordan's 90s 1 of 1s. Okay, pretend that that's the whole universe of cards, right? If that is all that matters, then how much more valuable, how much more desirable is the platinum, even if it's twice as valuable, right? Which is like pretty generous. If we're just looking at only the 90s 1 of 1s, we're not thinking about anything else. And, we say it's twice as desirable, 3 times as desirable even, which that's, it's at a certain point, how do you start to justify that within this little vacuum? But 2 to 3 times. So then we're talking about a value in that card of, 200, 300, 400, maybe even $500,000. But really beyond that, and even then, you could really argue that the power deck was overvalued in me and Stan's trade, and who knows, maybe it was. But if we take the power deck value as the baseline, we sort of say, well, there's something really special about coming from that first year and so on. But how big of a multiplier are we going to give it over the power deck, right? So in other words, I could see from the vantage point of somebody collecting 90s Michael Jordan 1 of 1s, and I have the blinders on. I really am not interested or concerned with what this other stuff is selling for. I once had a Noise Boys PSA 10 Michael Jordan insert, and I no longer do. And it was a great card. It's a beautiful card. I loved my time owning it. But it's just not something that's on my collecting radar. My collecting radar is finely tuned to the holiest of Grails. It's finely tuned to the first 1 of 1s of my favorite athlete, Michael Jordan. Okay, so just from my point of view, it's taking my assumptions and make them your own. Put yourself into my shoes, into my perspective, into my point of view. And I could see that platinum being up to 500,000. Just sort of based on how I valued the power deck, sort of how I know what the value of the quantums are. And so, and then I would also say that if that platinum is 500,000, then I think the quantum golds are 50 probably, right? I have a really hard time getting to a multiplier beyond 10x within a group of things that belong to the same group. And in this case, the first 72 Michael Jordan 1 of 1s. But so I could see it being up to 500,000. And then even as I was watching it go, I was interested up to $1 million, because even though I would say $1 million would be pretty overpriced from my point of view, from me having lots of experience, I for transparency's reasons and for establishing myself as a credible participant in this market. And reiterating this for those who don't know, I've said this many, many times in previous episodes, and I'm happy to reiterate it here. I have 18 of the first 72. Okay, so I've acquired all of those since June of last year. So I have a wealth of experience negotiating, trading, buying in this domain. And so I was willing to go, I was even interested up to $1 million. But not because I think it's worth that relative to the other 71 first 1 of 1s of MJ, but because I had the stuff I could sell that I think also is overvalued right now. If just being honest, I had the other stuff I could sell that I think is too high, or and once again, when I say it's overvalued, that's just me, right? It's like, if I'm the only I might be the only person in the world who thinks that these things are overvalued. but I am me. I'm not the average of all the points of view. I'm not these other people's opinions. I'm my own, right? So I can only operate from the way I see things, from all the information that I have exposure to, from all the experience that I have. I can only operate from what I know and from what I believe and what I have conviction in. And all the signs said that $1 million, to me, from my point of view, would be overvalued. But I was willing to do it because I have some other overvalued cards, and I could justify it to myself as well. I'll sell some other overvalued cards to get this overvalued card because I want it that much, because I revere the card that much, because I think it's that important. It's that significant of a piece. It's right here at the top of this chart. Before I ever knew that card would ever become available, there it sits at the top of my rare air rankings, using an objective system and a formula that takes as much as possible my bias out of it. Now, my bias still creeps in terms of finding lineage rarity to be important, finding chronological rarity to be important, finding rarity to be important at all. But in terms of applying those judgments, they're equally applied to every card, right? Like I'm not, moving the needle, I'm not adjusting the settings. I'm just setting the conditions, and I walk away, and whatever the result is, that's the result. And this is how the result came out. This is the result of my value system. And this card is at the very top of it. Okay. So like I would be willing to overpay for that, even significantly overpay for it. I was willing to, I guess, go up to I don't know, whatever multiplier of the quantum gold, not because I think it's worth that much more than the quantum gold, but because it might take that to get it. But after $1 million, I checked out. And so, the card got up to $1 million on the last day. And in fairness, to myself, sort of holding out hope, it had stayed comfortably under $1 million up to the last day. And then in the final hour, is sort of place marker bids came in or whatever for people to, because the way Heritage works is you have to place a bid before extended in order to be able to bid an extended. So bids started coming in in that final hour, and then it just blew past $1 million. At that point, I was out. But realistically, I value that card at maybe up to $500,000. I'd love it at 200,000 range, 300,000 even. $500,000, I'm still fine. $1 million is like the total furthest extent, the furthest I would stretch. But I have other stuff that I would be fine selling in order to get to that. But after that, and I always knew that was a real possibility. Like I obviously didn't want to say my price before, right? And that would not be wise bidding. But that was sort of my idea going into it, is just sort of holding on hope. But remember, the guide price was $2 million plus. So even though I did make arrangements with Heritage for, what the payment plan would be and how we would work it out and how I would send in cards to sell and what share of the buyer's premium I would get to keep from that and how we would credit that to my purchase and so on and so forth. I had taken the time, I'd spent another person's time to figure that out because I was that serious about it. But by the same token, the guide price was $2 million plus, and it ended up doing just a bit over that. Okay, so I went through that whole exercise there to sort of establish where sort of I valued it at, and sort of explain to you why I valued it in that range. But now we come to the question, well, then how the heck? So if I'm the guy who's most excited about these 90s MJ1-of-1s, and I have a bit of resources to marshal to be able to pay a pretty strong price for this, how the heck did it go for over two times what I had as the upper limit of what I'd be willing to pay for it? And I think there's a really easy answer to this. We've actually already answered it in a previous episode. But the answer is so instructive. The answer is so important to understanding not just how this market works, but the logic of this is applicable to many markets. It's an informational problem. It's an informational problem that people solve using a shortcut. And this shortcut is responsible, I think, for major pricing discrepancies. But again, it's all about how you look at things, right? It's all about how you cluster things. It's all about how you group things in your mind. And people are welcome to group things however they want. I know that the grouping that I've come to is the first 72 Michael Jordan 1-of-1s, and that has come through much research, much experience collecting 1-of-1s from other eras, much experience collecting non 1-of-1 Michael Jordans, and then eventually sort of a culmination of many years of experience and research and thinking sort of led me to this group and sort of understanding that there is just a natural boundary that exists that creates these first 72 one of ones. But maybe that just isn't obvious to others. Maybe it isn't natural to others. Maybe it never will be. So, but certainly it is to me, and I'm very excited to talk about it. The novelty of it, in fact, is what makes it so exciting for me to talk about it. It wouldn't be as exciting. I don't even know if I'd be podcasting about it if this was just obvious, well-known things that everybody already knew and accepted. The fact that it isn't is what makes it so much fun for me to uncover together with you. But here's how they got to that 2.1 million. And when, like I said, we've walked through this on a previous episode. And it's all about the undercard. Okay, the undercard. And I'm not talking about a boxing match. I'm talking about the undercard, the under sports card, the sports card that's a step below. It's all about that. And so let me pause for a second. It's all about the undercard. It's all about the card that's a step below. So the first thing to understand is that 1997-98 Ultra, the base set, actually offers 4 versions of its Michael Jordan card. The true base, which is the card that belongs to the base set. Then that's the first, the base card. Then there's the gold medallion parallel, which is unnumbered. It has no serial number, but it's very beautiful. And it actually has a color action shot of Michael Jordan, unlike the platinum and the masterpiece. So you have the base, you have the gold medallion, you have the platinum medallion, which is numbered to 100. And then you have the masterpiece. Excuse me. And then you have the masterpiece, which is the 1 of 1, which is the subject of this. And so when I say the undercard, I'm referring to the platinum medallion. The platinum medallion is the card that is one step down rarity-wise, right? So you have the base, which is the most ubiquitous. Then you have the gold medallion, which is unnumbered, but is considerably more rare than the base. Then you have the platinum medallion, which has only 100 copies. And then, of course, you have the masterpiece, which is a 1 of 1. And so the masterpiece didn't take its pricing cue from the fact that it belongs to the first 72 1 of 1s of Michael Jordan, because if it did, that logic would have much more closely followed what I laid out. It would have been much more closely valued the way that I valued it. People would have looked at what quantum golds go for or had recently gone for. They maybe would have consulted the power deck trade value. They would have looked at lots of things like that. And they maybe would have rounded up to 500,000 or something, maybe even all the way up to $1 million. Maybe they'd be willing to go that high if they really, really found it to be as important as I did. But the way that it gets to 2 million is by completely ignoring. In fact, you have to ignore Michael Jordan's other 1 of 1s. You have to ignore that $2 million is a 100x multiplier, even slightly more, over the last quantum gold sale. You have to ignore that. And instead, you have to say, forget the 100x, or even if the quantum gold is worth 40 grand or 50 grand today, forget the 40x multiplier. We're not basing this off of that. We're basing this off of what the platinum is worth, what the platinum medallion is worth. We're not, because if we were triangulating value by looking at what the other 90s 1 of 1s go for, this would have gone for much less, right? Because the market for Michael Jordan, his first 1 of 1s is very low, right? Relative to other things. It's quite low. So for example, the last sale of Michael Jordan's platinum medallion in the grade of PSA 8 was $54,000. Now just think about that for a second by itself. The platinum medallion in near mint condition, 100 copies, $54,000. Okay, $54,000 for that card. Compare that to a quantum gold, right? Which is a 1 of 1, which is 1 of the 72, and on and on and on. And even if you see it as a 1 of 30 rather than a 1 of 1, but it's still a 1 of 30 within that group of the first 1 of 1s, because quantum gold is a 30 card set. Even if you say the worst possible things you can about the quantum gold to try and downplay it, it's still one of his first 72 1 of 1s. It's still a beautiful card. it's still got this incredible, vintage upper deck gold sheen that just is so nostalgic, and on and on. And even that, even at the highest estimate of what one of those might be worth today, let's say 50,000, and there's no basis for that. That's just total speculation. The realistic, like the market puts, like if those had followed the normal Michael Jordan market trajectory, they'd be worth about 20,000 today or so. No matter which way we value them, they're less than this platinum out of 100. Okay. So we're two ships passing in the night here. These prices don't line up. And I'm not saying that the platinum is overpriced or anything like that, because the platinum itself derives its price from comparison to other cards that people see it as belonging to a group with. And people just aren't thinking about, they don't process, they don't care about Michael Jordan's first 72 one-of-ones, which sounds crazy to say, but it's true. They just don't care about them. They're not thinking about them. And where as contrasted against to the platinum medallion, which is a very visible card. That's a card that I've owned that card before in my history. I really do enjoy the design quite a bit, and it's a very well known Michael Jordan parallel, very well known Michael Jordan 90s card. So anyway, 54,000 most recent sale. And so if you don't compare the Platinum Masterpiece to the Quantum Golds and to the Power Decks, but if you compare it instead to the Platinum Medallion, the 2.1 million is a 38x multiplier against the Platinum. 2.1 million is a 38x multiplier for the Platinum Masterpiece against the Platinum Medallion out of 100. And there is a basis for this. Okay, so Allen Iverson's Platinum Medallion, the PSA 8 of that had sold for $3,200 a few months prior to his Ultra Masterpiece selling for $123,000, and that happened in 2025. That's fairly recent. So Iverson's multiplier from his Platinum out of 100 to his Masterpiece is 38x, just the same as what Michael Jordan's turned out to be. So 38x, there is a precedent for it. And then think about that. How if your basis for comparison, if you forget the 72 one-of-ones of Michael Jordan exist, which is the status quo right now. People don't know that these exist. Michael Jordan collectors are unaware of these. They are out of sight and out of mind. So if we put ourselves into a different mindset and we say that the undercard is what was used to price the Masterpiece, that the Platinum was used to price the Masterpiece, if we think about it from that way, then is 38x that unreasonable? There's 100 Platinums and there's only one Masterpiece. From this point of view, a 38x multiplier is modest. People are paying $54,000 for a fine grade, not the highest grade. I mean, I don't know what a PSA 10 Platinum would go for. It would go for six figures, certainly. So we're talking about a PSA 8, $54,000. Is 38x crazy? Is 38x low? To me, being somebody who's very, very keen on rarity, I think the multiplier on rarity should be at least equal to the number of copies that compose the differential. In other words, if there's 100 Platinums and only one Masterpiece, it stands to reason, I think, as a heuristic, as the quick shortcut, that the Masterpiece should be, if it's 100 times rarer, it's 100 times more desirable. At least it is to me. And if it's 100 times more desirable, is it that big of a leap to say it should be 100 times more valuable? So then there's a totally different side of things, right? And so then if you say 100x is a more reasonable multiplier, that puts this card at $5.4 million, and now all of a sudden the 2.1 million is a major undersell. But to be fair, there's no historical basis for that 100x multiplier. The historical basis is 30. So like I told you, when we went over this in a previous episode, the Iverson multiplier is 38x, the Stockton multiplier was 32x. I'm not going to walk through the Stockton numbers too. So, somewhere in there is a pattern emerging, and now Jordan at 38x adds another multiplier to the mix that says that the Masterpiece to Platinum Medallion multiplier is somewhere in the 30s, maybe the upper 30s, 38x, something like that. Okay. So that's the pricing logic here. And that's where there's a sharp divergence, a sharp divide between how the market priced this card, which lines up quite nicely with the undercard pricing logic, that this card was simply priced by using the historical multiplier. Whether that multiplier is something people think through intentionally or sort of it's just a feel thing. But in any event, that multiplier seems to be. We have 3 examples now of a platinum to masterpiece multiplier in the 30s, in the 30x range, 38x, 32x. So we have several examples of that now. And so that's one valuation method, and that valuation method really makes sense, because how much sense would it make for this masterpiece to sell for 500,000, which even I was saying that's relative to the other 72 1-of-1s, that seems high. How much sense would it make for it to sell at that price when the platinum in a PSA 8 sells for 54,000 and in a gem mint sells for 6 figures? How much that would make any sense, right? So the undercard is what set the price for this one. At least that's how it seems to me. And that's a very, very different logic. So that logic is classifying the platinum as belonging to this group of 4 ultra 97 versions: the base, the gold, the platinum, and the masterpiece. And sort of saying, looking at these, this is what makes sense for the masterpiece price based on what the platinums trade for. So in other words, you could trade 38 near mint copies of the platinum medallion. There probably are 38 near mint copies. I don't know how many are graded, but let's say that there's 38 near mint copies of the platinum. So in other words, if you had a table, on one side of the table you put the masterpiece 1-of-1, on the other side you put the 38 platinum medallion out of 100s in near mint condition, and that's a swap. Okay. And so it would be sort of thinking like, see, to me, when you put it that way, that swap makes no sense. Why would I want 38 of the 100 undercard? Why would I swap that for the one masterpiece? But there are some reasons. Liquidity is a reason. There's also just a ceiling on the market too. That's a whole separate discussion, but sort of that I think a lot of the stuff, a lot of the very rarest, coolest cards, like this one, are going to struggle to actually realize an appropriate multiplier because the undercards are really, really expensive. And so there's just not a lot of people out there willing to spend $2 million on a card. And that makes sense. Even if you had billions of dollars, I mean, how much are you allocating to cards? And even if you're allocating $50 million to cards, do you want to have 2 million of that 50 million? Do you want 4% of your budget tied up in one card? Maybe. I don't know. I guess probably I have 4% of my budget, my card budget, tied up in cards. But sort of you can see sort of as you sort of come down the budget scale, like if you have $5 million allocated to cards or something like that, which is a ton, right? Which is a massive amount of value to have tied up in cards. Do you want almost half of it tied up in one card? Or let's say you have 2 million value in cards. Do you want it all tied up in one card, right? That's sort of the flexibility points, right? Because once all the money is tied up in one card, now your ability to collect dynamically has really significantly been reduced. You can't, the argument for having 38 platinum the argument for having 38 platinum medallions rather than one masterpiece is that if you needed to sell one of them for $50,000 because you wanted to go buy another card, you could, and you still have the 37 of this card that you apparently love so much. That's what's in favor of sort of the dynamism of being able to and not have too much money tied up into one card. So, but that's a whole thread of discussion that's not going to unfold here. But sort of the thread, the line of thinking there is that there's something to be said for having many different cards that are all valuable, but that if you wanted to sort of move on from one or two of those cards, you can. Whereas if you just have one giant card, you're stuck. You can't sell 10% of that card. Well, I don't know. Maybe you could fractionalize it or something, but then you co-own it with somebody, and that starts to get weird. So it's, for all intents and purposes, if you intend to own your cards by yourself, having one card be, your entire collection or a big chunk of it removes your ability to dynamically do things, right? You sort of start over from scratch. You sort of have the one card, but then you have to start over and just sort of sock money away and, save money from your paycheck and just sort of build up to add, and then sort of then you add like $1,000 card to your $2 million card. It just starts to seem a little bit weird. So I think that's part of, anyway, the point is that I think that's part of the reason why there's a ceiling on masterpieces like this, where they only go for 38x of the undercard, even though it would be bizarre to think you would trade that one masterpiece for the 38 versions of the undercard, until you start thinking about how nice it is to be able to sell one or two or three cards and still have and retain the ability to make a lot of different moves. So as we sort of wrap up here, that's kind of the nature of this discussion, is that, or that's sort of the observation that leaps out at me, is just how important it is how we classify cards, right? If you classify this masterpiece as belonging to one of the 72 Michael Jordan 1-of-1s, it seems like it went for way too much. But if you classify it as belonging to the 4-type family of 97 Ultra Michael Jordan, the base, the gold, the platinum, and the masterpiece, it seems like it might have went low, right? So it's kind of all about what group you put it in and how you start doing that comparison. And then it shouldn't be surprising that people aren't valuing it in accordance with the 72 1-of-1s, because who really knows about that besides us? Nobody, right? We are the only people who really thought about it in that way. So let me talk about the purple briefly too, because the purple, so the purple sold for 625,000. And we did some math on that too. In a previous episode, we went and looked at different multipliers. We looked at the Shaq purple multiplier, Dennis Rodman purple multiplier, and Tracy McGrady purple multiplier. And so, Shaq's multiplier was 63x, Rodman's was only 20x, McGrady's was 98x. And so if you went with the Rodman multiplier, which was 20x, and then you note that Jordan's purple platinum medallion from 98, which is numbered to 99, that last sold for 23,000 in a PSA 8. The Rodman multiplier actually predicted this price pretty well. The Rodman multiplier predicted, the 20x multiplier predicted a price of 468,000 for the Jordan, and it went for 625. It didn't get close to the Shaq or the McGrady multipliers. The Shaq multiplier predicted 1.4. The McGrady multiplier predicted 2.2. And if you averaged all three of those multipliers, it predicted a price of 1.4 million for this card, and it went quite a bit lower. And so you sort of have to think about what effect. So maybe you think like this is just a natural multiplier. Once again, this price clearly doesn't make sense in the context of Michael Jordan 1-of-1 collecting from the 90s. 625,000 for that. So this is a post-retirement announcement card. This is a second year one, so it belongs to the 57 that came after retirement, or it belongs to the 65 that belonged to the second year. It's a very beautiful card. Has a very beautiful design, but the multiplier, the multiplier becomes very difficult to justify here, because it just doesn't have the significance that the Platinum Masterpiece did, being the first Michael Jordan 1-of-1 chronologically to ever be released. So once again, it's a very big price, and the price is out of whack with how pricing exists for the vast majority of Michael Jordan's first 72 1-of-1s. But the pricing makes quite a bit of sense relative to the undercard, relative to the Platinum Medallion for Jordan. It's still arguably undersold relative to how multipliers usually work. So like, to sort of set it up as again like, so I don't know, I guess what is the multiplier that ultimately came to fruition? So 625,000 divided by 23,400. So the multiplier that ultimately came to fruition is about 25x. Okay, so if there were 25 1998, 99 platinum medallions out of 99 on the table and the purple masterpiece on the table, would you make that swap? Would you trade your one purple for the 25 platinums? That's tough to think that that's an even swap, but that's where the multiplier ends up. Now, the McGrady multiplier was super interesting. Right? The McGrady multiplier was 98x. Now, that's a multiplier that makes more sense to me. McGrady's last PSA 8 platinum sold for $465, and his purple sold for $45,600, and that gave the 98x multiplier. And this sort of lines up with the ceiling theory that a 100x multiplier is possible, is likely on a card where there's 99 copies versus the masterpiece. The undercard is 99 copies and the masterpiece is a 1 of 1. A 98x multiplier is possible there because that multiplier only gets you up to $45,000. So there's plenty of people who can afford to have a $45,000 card and still have plenty of other cards and still have plenty of funds to play around with like that. That card won't cannibalize their entire collection by having it. So that's sort of the ceiling theory sort of suggests that the lower we go down the price ranks, the more possible it is for there to be larger and larger multipliers to sort of actually start to match, the rarity ratio. And even then, if there were 98 of McGrady's platinum medallion out of 99 on the table and the one purple masterpiece, I still would take the masterpiece. Okay, now with that said, the other wrinkle here, which we discussed and content creators discussed and the caption discussed as well, the other wrinkle here is that the purple has the 2 copies in circulation. I think we touched on that earlier in this episode too. So the 2 copies in circulation was probably a pretty powerful downward pressure price-wise on this. Now, if somebody ever united the 2 copies, that sort of cures the problem of there being 2, because you don't have to worry about there being 2 in the wild. Even though there are 2, they're brought together. So effectively, they are, if you can think of them as just one card now that's been united, you could even destroy one of them if you wanted to. And then you return the status of that card to being a true 1 of 1. So one does hope that they can get united. That would be pretty special. But that's probably part of the explanation for the purple. And, that was part of why I wasn't interested in the purple. I was hoping that the purples would be brought together. I would have no ability to bring them together if I did win one of the 2. So I lost interest on that level. And then just at the price, I would be interested in that purple at like 100,000. So, if that purple is trading at a multiple of, I don't know, whatever the quantum gold is. If the quantum gold is 20,000, that's a 5x multiple. If it's 50,000, it's a 2x multiple. I like that card at 2 to 5x of quantum gold, maybe. It's within reason. If somebody could, start stacking multiples of why they like it better, but I don't like it at 20x, 30x, or whatever a quantum gold. No, sir. I mean, we don't need to go through that whole thought experiment again, but I love the quantum golds at 20,000 relative. I love them at 50,000 relative to the platinum masterpiece at 2.1 million, or the purple masterpiece at 625,000. But that's because I have the 90s MJ 1 of 1 goggles on, and the market doesn't have those goggles on, right? The market's have so I guess like the final takeaway here, to sort of offer something optimistic to the rebellious thinker, to offer something optimistic to the creative thinker, to the person who is challenging the status quo and then who might have found substance behind that challenge. If you believe you've found a way of looking at the market that has a strong logic, and that if enough people were to think about it critically and were to see it your way, that at least some people might join you, then there is tremendous opportunity in finding lanes where you're able to identify this class of like the 72 Michael Jordan 1 of 1s. And some of them have undercards that push their value way up because the undercard is part of the mainstream, and the undercard is bid up and is really, really expensive. And then there's others that also belong to that same group of one-of-ones, but the undercard is way cheaper, way cheaper. And so as long as the market is pricing things in accordance to the logic of the undercard, and it makes sense, that's a really simple way to look at it. And it takes a lot of research and time to sort of identify something like the first 72 one-of-ones of a player or whatever, or what have you. But that's where the excitement lives. That's where the energy lives. That's where the edge lives, is being the person to stumble into that and say, I think these cards, I think that the quantum gold and the platinum masterpiece are part of the same class. I'm not saying they're equal cards. I'm not even saying a 10x multiplier would be out of bounds. But I think they're part of the same class. But the market isn't seeing it that way. The market doesn't even know this class exists, but it does. There's a very natural logic to the idea of the first one-of-ones. There's a very natural logic to that, but the market doesn't see it that way. So there is where opportunity lives. That's where potential lives, and where it dies too, right? There's no guarantee that anybody will ever see it that way as well. So be careful, right? We have to be careful. We have to know the risks that when we're voyaging out into uncharted territory, that maybe nobody follows us into that territory. But it's fun. It's part of the excitement of collecting. And so there's almost 2 hours worth of takes and thinking and analyzing these two sales, and they were pretty fun to watch happen. They're actually, it was quite deflating to watch it happen, because I was foolishly holding out hope that they would stay within my upper bounds of where I valued each one, but I'm so entrenched in the logic of one-of-one collecting of Michael Jordan that these prices just these prices clearly, in my view, are derivative of a totally different logic. These prices are derivative of the undercard pricing logic, which is a logic that makes plenty of sense, but it's just not the logic that I practice. It's not the way that I look at things. So that's why things unfolded the way they did. And that's also why these sales, like that's a lot of context surrounding them to sort of understand that these sales probably don't say anything. I'm not sure that there's anything we can learn about what the market is like for Michael Jordan's 90s one-of-ones, because the market didn't really view these cards as belonging to that group. It seems to have viewed them as it naturally would have, as sort of using the undercard pricing logic. So this was a lot of fun to talk about. Sorry for being a little price heavy. And with the final, with underscoring once more that I do think both of these are magnificent cards, and I was willing to move a really meaningful part of my collection to make a play at either one, but that the market just completely blew past me, and that's fine. I think these are magnificent cards, and that this is just a walk through how I see things. This is not a requirement that you must agree with that, or even I obviously have put a lot of thought into this, and I think that I've reasoned through it pretty well. But in no way do I think that my reasoning is infallible either. I could be missing some things. I could be too far a C, and perhaps I'm just a guy on an island by himself, the lone wolf. And so that's an important caveat to take away from this as well, is that just one person's views, not any better or worse than your views, or the market's views or anybody's views. And I love to hear all the different points of view, especially a point of view that says something that hasn't quite been said before, or that challenges the status quo in a way that can be grounded in logic and in a careful, thoughtful approach. So that's going to do it for HOJ-Cast 33. See you guys for the next one.